began our study on Proverbs, and we defined what Proverbs were and the sayings that Solomon wrote. And today we'll try to study chapters 2 and chapter 3. And that's a pretty big bite. I'm not going to get tied up too much if we don't make it to the end, but that's the goal for today. So, we talked about Solomon writing this down, and he was writing from the wisdom that God gave to him, and he was penning it because of some experiences. He was trying to teach from his life. Is that me? Oh, okay. We good. So we tried to think about his life and how wise he was, and there's a sharp distinction between knowledge and wisdom. And in chapter 2, I think we learn there's another dimension of it, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Because he actually says different words in the context. So, difference between understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. So, today, chapter 2 has 22 verses. There is some thought that each verse is because of the Hebrew alphabet. There's 22 characters in that alphabet, and one, I don't know. That's just what somebody has written. To me, it's kind of like day-to-day operations. It's like, listen to me because I've done this. And he just had 22 verses. Now, we know and understand that the whole Bible was not written in book and chapter and verses, right? It was written as we would write a letter or a paragraph or even a thesis statement. Not that I ever did that much. But, so I don't know that I subscribe to that, but that's just some of the thoughts. Some of the other thoughts are that he was specifically talking to a son. Solomon in chapter 2 says, there is guidance from a father to a son. That makes a lot of sense to me. But also, it would be as an older, wiser generation trying to teach those of us that are not that. And Brian and I taught this class to the high school level last quarter. So we were thinking, okay, he and I are the old guys, and then them 16, 17-year-old boys in there were the young ones, right? But now I'm in here, and there's some that's physically older than me. So I think it's a process that we learn all the way through life. And Solomon is using a father-son relationship to teach us that. To me, that's the application of what Proverbs chapter 2 is trying to teach us. It's important that we understand what words mean. What does the word value mean to you? If you value something, what do? Cherish it, absolutely. Maybe even treasure, right? Maybe it's a treasure to us. I've got a 12-gauge shotgun that's a long barrel pump. Takes 2 men and a boy to hold it. It's huge. Probably worth $50. Probably. Because it's run-of-the-mill. There was probably... How many of them's built, Tommy? I mean, thousands and millions, right? It's a run-of-the-mill shotgun. Everybody in this room could shoot it with some training. Tommy could grab a hold of it and shoot it now. But I probably wouldn't take $1 million for it. Now, nobody's offered me the greenbacks yet. Nobody's pulled out their checkbook and said, I'll give you $1 million for your shotgun. But the reason that it's valuable to me is because my granddad gave it to me when I was 10 or 11, 12 years old. My brother comes to the house sometimes and we shoot skeet with it. I clean it and I put it back up for the next time he comes. But why is that valuable to me? Yes, sir. That's right. Tommy said, for those that couldn't hear and those online, that it's like a landmark. It's something that we put in the ground that we say, that's our heritage. It could have been a car. It could have been a piece of furniture for someone else. But the ancient history's there, and we don't change that landmark. Y'all walk in my closet and grab that shotgun after I'm dead, and somebody says, Brian, Tommy, that gun's what's that worth? He's going to go $25. You want it? I'll give it to you. Right? That you would give it away if somebody wanted it, because it doesn't mean anything to you. You know? He wants it for $25. But that's, to me, is kind of the way we would apply value to something, right? So what is chapter 2 teaching us? That above that silly shotgun that I treasure, more than anything else, we have to have the value of wisdom. God's given it to us. And we have to be able to cherish it to the point of somebody wouldn't give us $1 million for it, or $1 billion, or $1 trillion, right? It has to be that valuable, and that's what chapter 2 is teaching. I'm sorry? Absolutely. Yeah, Lewis said an heirloom be a inheritance to us. That's exactly right. To me, verse 5 teaches us the definition of value through wisdom when Solomon penned these words. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. What is that teaching us? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Sorry, I'm ahead. Just forget that for about 10 minutes. That's in chapter 3. Sorry. Let's go to chapter 2. So the value of the wisdom is the words that Solomon has written, okay? And I'd like to read it because I think he's already said it to the point that none of us can improve on it. He wrote it down because God gave him the inspiration. So let's read a few verses and we'll have some comments. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you will incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out with discernment and lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as a hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So we learn very quickly there's two ways, right? What is an if-then statement? If you eat all of your zebra cake, then you get to eat your vegetables, right? That's backwards, I know. But in my world, it works. But your grandmothers usually would say, if you eat all this green stuff, then what happens? You get dessert. We got it messed up. I'm going to convert the world one dessert at a time. I've never had a problem cleaning my vegetables, so. But what is an if-then statement? If-then. Solomon says, if you receive my words, treasure my commandments, apply your heart, cry out for discernment, lift up your voice for understanding, seek her as precious or some kind of gold or silver, search for the hidden treasures, then what happens? You will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So the if statement is you've got to do a little bit of work. You've got to find wisdom. You got to figure out the discernment. You got to look for the treasure. You got to value it. And then what happens? You understand. You understand what happened. If then. All if then statements require action of some sort, right? It's just a fact of life, I guess you could say. If then.
Make a lot of mistakes.
Yes, absolutely. She said that we make a lot of mistakes. And that's true. right? Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a good point. So Tommy said basically that if you think about the upcoming verses in chapter 2 that we'll read in just a minute, it teaches us the benefit of this if-then statement. It teaches us the protection, and we need that. And he referenced 1 Samuel 16. It was 18. 1 Samuel 18 that talked about Saul took David under his wing and he guided him. And the text actually says David lived, listened wisely. That's the protection that we're getting here in chapter 2. And then basically, sometimes we carry that too far and what'd you say? We protect ourselves.
Sometimes we need protection
From ourselves. Sometimes we need protection from ourselves. That's a good point. Anything else? So let's just read these verses that Tommy's referenced. In verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the path of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice equally in equity. What's that word? Say it. There it is. Thank you. In every good path. Sorry, they just don't come out sometimes. So is this another if-then statement, or is it the original if, the second part then? I think it goes back to verse 1. If you receive, he talks about that protection, like Tommy mentioned, and he talks about the shield. You know, you can get behind a shield and it protects you. God is going to have his pathway clear, if you will, for those of us that are obeying his will. He has already got it done. The protection's there. Then the second part is, then you'll understand righteousness and judgment, or justice. So you don't understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. And now then you will understand righteousness and judgment. Justice. I keep saying the wrong thing. You will understand that righteousness. So it begs the question, what's the difference between wisdom, knowledge, and understanding? You know, Kelly said last week, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. It's pretty good. So what's the difference between knowledge and understanding?
There's worldly knowledge and there's godly knowledge. So it's best to have the godly knowledge of the Lord.
Absolutely. She said there's two different kinds of knowledge, worldly knowledge and godly knowledge. The better of the two is the latter. We better know the knowledge of God. So is knowledge and understanding the same? So what's understanding? That's it. That's why we have a question and answer service on Sunday nights, is because we know the knowledge, but we don't understand it. So let me try to put it in a context that I understood. The knowledge is, you know that 10 plus 10 is 20, right? The understanding is when you go to the store and you only have $19 to buy something that's 20. You've automatically just understood what $20 means, right? You had the knowledge. You had 10 plus 10 since the first grade, since the kindergarten. I don't know. You had that knowledge. But you go to the store and you buy 2 gallons of milk, you can't buy it with $20. Or maybe you can. Milk's expensive. So what's the point? Where does the wisdom come in? You have to apply that understanding, right? That's what Solomon's doing here. If you do all these commandments, if you look for these things, you look for that treasure, the value's coming, then you understand the fear of God, then you know the knowledge of the justice and the righteousness. There's the value, isn't it? Oh no, it's straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward.
Absolutely.
That, to me, is the essence of wisdom.
Yeah. Russell said basically he talked about knowledge and understanding, and wisdom is the application of that understanding to the point that you can explain it simply to someone. I get that. If you can't understand it, if you can't explain it, you sure can't understand it. Wait, if you don't understand it, you can't explain it. Clear as mud, right?
They supposedly say, it's attributed to Einstein, he knows, but supposedly he said that if you can't explain something to a kindergartner, you really don't understand it.
That's right. Yeah, he said if you can't explain something to a kindergartner, you don't really understand it yourself. Yes, sir, Tommy. That's right. He referenced history and generals, and he said that the facts was known greatly, but he was weak in the understanding. He didn't know the why, and that's how the computers started. Do we know why they work? Do we know the why? Is this conversation, and this is what Solomon is teaching. We know the facts, but do we know the understanding? Do we have it? Do we grasp it? Any other comments? Very good, thank you. Look at verse 10. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things. For those who leave the path of unrighteousness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perversity of the wicked, whose ways are crooked and who are devious in their paths, to deliver you from the immortal woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house leads down to death, and her paths to the dead. None who go to her return, nor they regain the paths of life. So you may walk in the way of goodness and keep it to the path of the righteousness. For the upright will dwell in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the earth, and the unfaithful will be uprooted from it. So what are those 12 verses teaching us? Is it as simple as we have a choice? Is it that simple? She said yes, and I agree with her. You choose to treasure, you choose to find God, you choose to understand His knowledge, you choose to grow in that wisdom, the path's don't be clear for you. But if you choose the other, you're going to be uprooted, right?
It's either God or the world.
She said it's either God or the world. That's a good point. Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Russell said that basically the first part of it was when we know what's right, we battle ourselves internally because it's hard. We don't want to suffer the consequences necessarily. We don't want to think about that's the right thing to do. Now, how can I not do that instead of just doing it? And then he referenced Solomon in his life and all the concubines and all the wives that he had, the 1,000 of women. And if he'd have listened to this advice in chapter 2, Ecclesiastes may not have been in the Bible. He didn't listen to it. So Ecclesiastes was written after Proverbs. I get that confused. I don't know for a fact. Russell don't know for a fact. He's giving me I don't know. Did he live and write Ecclesiastes and then he thought about it and wrote Proverbs?
It all depends. People argue about that all the time.
Yeah.
Did he write Ecclesiastes when he was a young man? Or did he write Ecclesiastes when he was an old man?
Yeah.
Nobody, I think personally, he wrote it when he was an old man.
It kind of trends toward that. It kind of leans toward that language, that it was looking back on his life. Yeah. So chapter 2, if I could summarize it, I would say the value of wisdom. And he's using a father-son relationship to teach us today. Older versus younger, you have the choice. Any other comments on chapter 2? And I don't want to rush chapter 2 at all, but if we don't have any other comments, we'll go on to chapter 3. The value of wisdom, chapter 2. So, chapter 3... the heading in this is a New King James translation, and the ever who put this together uses the words guidance for the young. It makes a lot of sense after you read chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a very well studied proverb, a collection of proverbs. There's people even in the world that look at Proverbs chapter 3 for some guidance because of what it teaches. Then they distort it when they want to do their own thing. But then, but chapter 3 is a context of guidance. Now we've got to remember that chapter 1 and chapter 2, Solomon spent a lot of time on wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Now we're going to try to put all these three together in this guidance, okay? How do you give guidance to someone? How do you give guidance? Could you do it by example? You try to what? I'm sorry. That's right. Charles says you try to recommend it, but they may not always listen. So we got recommendation, example. Yes, sir. Yell at them as loud as you can. That's probably going to work. Good job. Yes, sir. Dennis said that he said it's a rule, a law. It is governed by something. It's not just a suggestion. Here's one of the ways that I can think about guidance. If we go across the road here, and I have a 4 or 5-year-old, and I grab that young person's hand, and I lead them across the road, is that guidance? Physically, I'm dragging them across the road, right? Because they're probably not wanting to hold my hand. But it is guidance. It's like, okay, we need to pay attention to certain things. We need to look at it from a different perspective, because a young child, what is it? What's their number one goal? To get across the road. We're going, and we're going now. But when I grab their hand and we look both ways, and I'm not suggesting cross 127. I am not at all suggesting that you do that, because that's a chore. But that's guidance, is it not?
One way of guidance is saying what not to do.
A way of guidance is saying what not to do. Very good. Don't touch that stove. Why? It's hot. It's hot. Still hot. Yeah, right. Some of that's coming out in Proverbs. I told you so. I can just see Solomon saying, I told you so. In some of the verses. So that to me is guidance. So that's what chapter 3 is talking about, is the guidance. Now we've just finished a chapter on a father-son relationship, the value of it. Now we're going to learn about guidance. Here's verse 5. Here's the hinge of chapter 3. I just got ahead of myself. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your what? own understanding. It's not up to Brian. It's not up to anyone in this room. It is up to God for the understanding. Now, how do I get God's understanding? How do I get God's knowledge and God's wisdom? He's given it to us, right? We read the old law, the guidance is there. We turn to Matthew through Revelation, and the commandments are there. The guidance is there. He's given us everything that we need. But He's not going to let me put it on the top of my head and it's filter down through my brain and get to my heart. It's not going to happen, is it? I've got to open it and I've got to read these words. Then I've got the knowledge, right? Because I've read it. Now I'm working on the understanding. And then we apply it. That's right. Absolutely. That's where the knowledge comes, right? That's where the wisdom comes. So, Proverbs chapter 3 is... Let me get there. So, let's read a few verses again in chapter 3. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace, they will add to you. Okay, we need to stop right there, right? But let your heart keep my commandments, or my commands. For the length of days and long life and peace, they will add to you. So if your heart is keeping the Lord's commands, how does that increase our long, peaceful? How does that increase? The length of days and long life and peace, they will add to you.
You know you're doing what's right, then you don't feel guilty. And you know that God's watching you. God's taking care of you, so you feel peace.
That's right. She says, if you know that you're doing right, you don't have to basically feel guilty. And you feel peace. It's a peaceful feeling, right? So if we're thinking about the guidance, and we're saying, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your understanding, verse 5. And now we read, my son, do not forget the law, but let your heart keep. What does let your heart? What does that imply? What does that teach to us? Let your heart. Not changing the context at all, but what if we say, but allow your heart? Is that doing injustice to the text? It's again showing choice, right? It's again showing that it's on me. If I let my heart, I'm going to choose for my heart to do right. I'm going to think the way God thinks. I'm going to act the way He would have me to do that. Now, I'm not saying that we're perfect. We all mess up. But we are trying to walk in the way. And y'all help me if I'm wrong, but is that not what it's teaching? Let your heart. You have that choice, right? You have that choice of what you're putting in there. Let your heart keep my commandments. Verse 3. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. How does something forsake you? If you don't apply it and you don't use it. Language is very interesting to me. I don't do very well with the English language. Southern English I'm okay at. If that's if that's a variation. But people that are bilingual, that are fluent in another language other than their native tongue, what do they use? What do they do? If I was a Spanish-speaking person, I would order my lunch at Cancun in Spanish. Why? Because if we don't use it, we're losing it, right? If we don't use it, if we don't apply mercy and we don't apply truth, we're going to lose it. That's what Solomon's teaching here. Then verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean on your own understanding. Verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. It's interesting to me that he said, in all your ways. Lip service talks cheap, right? Did you hear Anderson Wednesday night when he said this statement? At the end, he said, always preach the sermon. Always preach Jesus and use words if you must. That's pretty powerful. I've heard that before. I don't think it was original from him. And he would say that. But if we are living for God, our words are a byproduct. I know that means a lot coming from me, right? Because I can talk all day long and not say a thing. But that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to live in the ways that someone knows that, hey, they're living for God. And we won't have to say a word. So, verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Is that physical? Absolutely it is. If you are not stressed, are you healthier? Is stress a motivator for non-healthy people sometimes, Paige? It is, right? So how do you eliminate stress? How do you find the peace? Let not the mercy and not let the truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the table, on the tablet of your heart. How do you not become the way of the world? You put God on the tablet of your heart. And you live for God. And for the sake of time, any questions or comments? Really, chapter 3 is a context on guidance. It's applying that knowledge so that you can have wisdom. But let's look at verse 12, and then we'll skip down and look at verse 35. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights. So, is the Bible correction for us? The answer is yes. The Bible is a correction for us. It tells us what to correct in our life. Verse 35. The wise shall inherit glory, but the shame shall be the legacy of fools. That's a sharp contrast, isn't it? The wise shall inherit what? What does it say? The wise shall inherit glory or heaven. That's right. But shame shall be the legacy of fools. Is that talking about the afterlife, heaven and hell? Glory and fools? I agree. I think it is. Also, an application could be for this earthly world that the glory and the peace are going to come because we're not stressed because we're not guilty and we're doing what God wants us to do, right?
That's why we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world.
Exactly. She said that we're supposed to be in the world, not of the world, right? Any other comments or questions, criticisms? If it's okay, good Lord wills for us to come back next Sunday, we'll do chapters 4 and 5. Is it too rushed to try to do 2 chapters? Or do you want me to just do a chapter? Okay, if we do 2, we can potentially get done with the whole book. So we'll continue to try to do 2 chapters. Thank you very much.